Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
Something strange is happening inside Broncos headquarters, and it is the kind of strange that makes even the most even-keeled reporters in the building stop typing and stare at each other. Denver Broncos fans, buckle up, because what you are about to hear is one of the weirdest, most unexplainable stories to come out of training camp in years. A star wide receiver has now taken not one, not two, but 3 rest days in a row. 3. And by day 3, this was not even a physical practice. There were no pads. There was no contact. There was no reason on paper for a healthy player to be standing on the sideline again. And when the media finally got him in front of a microphone, the answers that came out of his mouth were so strange, so oddly rehearsed, that half the room seemed more confused walking away than when they walked in. This is the story of Courtland Sutton, and by the end of this video, you are going to have just as many questions as everybody covering this team live in Colorado. Before diving into the deep end of this mystery, if you love your Denver Broncos and you want more breakdowns like this one, do the channel a favor and smash that like button, drop a comment with your own theory on what is going on, and hit subscribe so you never miss a single update out of training camp. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and there is a lot more Broncos news to get through today, so let's get into it. Let's set the scene properly, because context matters here. Sutton took his very first veteran rest day like most established players do during camp. That is completely normal. Nobody blinks at a single rest day for a veteran with his mileage. Then he took a second one, and that raised a few eyebrows, but it was explainable, because the day before had been, by every account, the most physically brutal practice of the entire training camp. Players were hitting, banging, and grinding through nearly every second the collective bargaining agreement allows for full contact work. So a veteran wide receiver sitting out the day after that kind of war made sense. Reporters who have covered this franchise for decades, guys who have seen every type of camp scenario imaginable, said that even a second consecutive rest day for a veteran was something they could not remember happening before. But there was at least a physical explanation on the table. Then came day 3. And day 3 is where this entire story stops making sense. Day 3 was not a padded, physical, bang-it-out practice. It was the opposite. It was an unpadded session, the kind of low-contact day where the injury risk drops dramatically and players who are banged up often test the water because the risk is so low. Sutton was actually seen out on the field for portions of it, which had fans and reporters buzzing immediately, assuming he was back and cleared. Then, just as quickly as the excitement built, Sutton peeled off to a side field. Not the practice field, the side field, the rehab field. The exact same field where players recovering from actual injuries have been working throughout camp. That is the same area where other banged-up players have been putting in their recovery work. When a star player who was supposedly just needing rest suddenly shows up on the rehab field on day 3 of sitting out, that is not a coincidence anymore. That is a pattern. And patterns do not lie, even when press conferences try to. So naturally, once cameras and microphones caught up to him, the obvious question got asked directly: are you healthy? And his answer was one word that nobody casually drops into conversation unless they are being deliberately evasive or deliberately clever. He said indubitably, think about that for a second. Nobody talks like that in a real, off-the-cuff, spontaneous answer. That is a word people reach for when they want to sound confident while giving away absolutely nothing. It is the verbal equivalent of a shrug wrapped in a smirk. And that single word set the tone for one of the strangest athlete press conferences you will see out of this franchise all year. Because it did not stop there. The very first words out of his mouth, before any real question had even fully registered, were about being a good soldier. He said it once, then circled back and said it again in a completely different exchange. Not just once, like a passing phrase, but as a recurring theme throughout the entire session. Being a good soldier is not a phrase that just slips out. That is a phrase people use when they are following orders they may not personally agree with, when they are choosing loyalty and discipline over their own instincts or desires. Watch his body language while he says it, and you do not need to be a professional communications expert to sense the disconnect between the words leaving his mouth and whatever is actually going on behind his eyes. He even paused mid-sentence to backtrack and greet everyone in the room, almost like he was trying to reset the tone after realizing how strange his first answer had already sounded. Then, when pressed again later, he doubled right back down on that same phrase, saying he was trying to be a good soldier whether it was something he personally wanted to do or not. That is not the language of a guy who is simply tired and needs a breather. That is the language of a guy who feels like he is in the middle of something bigger than himself, something he does not fully control. So what is actually going on here? There are really 3 working theories floating around Broncos country right now, and every single one of them has holes in it worth talking through. Theory number 1, he is a trade candidate, and the team is quietly shopping him. On the surface, this theory has some juice to it. There has been chatter about the coaching staff falling in love with a younger, cheaper option at the position, and roster crunches do force tough decisions. But here is the massive problem with that theory. You do not trade a guy and then parade him out in front of every camera and reporter at practice for a live press conference. If a team is actively shopping a player, the last thing they want is that player standing at a podium fielding pointed questions about his health and his future while trade calls are happening behind the scenes. Teams protect trade assets by keeping them quiet, not by putting them center stage in front of a swarm of media. So while the trade theory sounds spicy, the actual behavior of the organization does not match it. Theory number 2, he is simply injured, and the team is being cautious. This one also has issues. If he were genuinely hurt in a way serious enough to require 3 rest days in a row, you typically see a player either not dress at all, or you see the team address it directly and clearly instead of letting a mystery fester for 3 straight days while the player himself gives cryptic, uncomfortable answers. Injured players get placed on lists, get direct updates from the coaching staff, and rarely get shoved in front of live cameras to awkwardly dodge questions with words like indubitably. If the team wanted to protect a legitimate injury, they had every opportunity to just say so plainly. They did not. Which brings us to theory number 3, and this is the one that actually lines up with everything we are seeing. This has to be about his contract. Somewhere behind the scenes, there is almost certainly a negotiation happening. Whether that is a new extension, a restructured deal, or a renegotiated rate, similar to moves other players on this roster have already made this offseason to help the team's financial situation. When teams are working through delicate contract conversations with a veteran, it is incredibly common to keep that player on the field in a limited, low-risk capacity, essentially wrapping him in bubble wrap so nothing jeopardizes the deal being worked out. He still shows up. He still talks to media because hiding him completely would raise even more alarm bells. But he is kept away from live contact, kept off the highest risk reps, and quietly shuffled toward the rehab field the moment real physical activity ramps up. This organization has done exactly this kind of maneuvering before with a marquee veteran whose guaranteed money situation was in flux, dramatically scaling back that player's practice reps while working out the business side behind closed doors. If that is what is happening here, then Sutton's strange, guarded, borderline scripted press conference makes complete sense. He knows something is being worked out. He is not allowed to say what. So he leans on vague, soldier-like language because loyalty and discipline are the only safe things he can talk about publicly while the front office finishes its business. If this theory is correct, the hope here is simple. Get it done and get it done quickly so this star playmaker can get back to full go without a cloud hanging over every practice rep. Whatever the real answer turns out to be, one thing is clear. This is one of the strangest, most talked about storylines to come out of Denver's camp in a long time, and it deserves to be watched closely over the next several days. Now, while all of that mystery has been unfolding, there is actually a wave of genuinely encouraging news coming out of the rest of camp that Broncos fans need to hear. Because it is easy to get so wrapped up in one storyline that the bigger picture gets lost. Start with the newest addition to the receiver room. He was seen out at practice, which by itself is a good sign because it means he is not confined to the training room around the clock. There is a noticeable limp and some kind of protective sleeve on one knee, which is not exactly the image fans want to see from a marquee offseason addition. But here is the part that should ease some nerves: the head coach, who is notoriously tight-lipped and typically shuts down injury questions the moment they are asked, actually gave a real timetable this time. 4 to 5 days described as a strain. That level of specific detail from a coach who almost never offers it is actually meaningful. This is a coaching staff that has built a track record over the last several years of not sugarcoating or overstating injury situations, so when a firm number gets attached to a recovery timeline, that carries real weight. That is a good sign, plain and simple. There is more good injury news to go around too. A key pass rusher who has been working through his own recovery was seen out on the field wearing a helmet, which is another encouraging step in a positive direction. Every update on him, on the starting center working back from his own issue, and on a veteran receiver dealing with a separate ailment has trended the same way. On schedule, on track, no setbacks. That consistency matters. Anyone who has scrolled through other teams' camp updates around the league this preseason knows that when injuries are serious, players often just do not show up to practice at all, sometimes for weeks. The fact that this roster keeps having players cycle back onto the field on schedule is a genuinely strong signal heading into the season. Then there is the quarterback situation, and this might be the most quietly important development of the entire day. Even without 2 of his top receiving weapons on the field, the starting quarterback had one of his best days of camp. The defense had won the previous 2 days in the classic training camp battle of offense versus defense, and on this particular day, the offense finally struck back in a big way. Multiple periods went by without a single incompletion hitting the ground while the starters were running the show. That is exactly the kind of performance you want to see from your franchise quarterback, especially when he is missing key parts of his supporting cast. It shows growth, command of the offense, and trust in whoever steps up to fill those receiving spots in the meantime. There was also a fun little nugget buried in the day's practice notes that deserves a shout-out, because it says something about roster construction and coaching philosophy heading into the season. The kicker knocked through a 70-yard field goal in practice. 70 yards. That is an absurd number on its own. But it also raises an interesting question that has lingered around this coaching staff for a while now. Why does this team sometimes choose to punt the ball away even when well within a kicker with that kind of leg strength range? There have been multiple instances over the last couple of seasons where the team found itself in the high 50s. Clearly scoring range for a kicker this strong, and the coaching staff elected to punt instead, prioritizing field position over the aggressive points. It is a fair question worth watching as the season unfolds, especially with a new quarterback in the mix who might want to push the tempo and stretch the field more aggressively than this coaching staff has traditionally allowed. Will that same conservative field position first mentality carry over, or will this new era of the offense open things up? That is a storyline worth tracking start of the season. And finally, for anyone who needed one more reason to feel good about where this team is heading, a major national outlet released its predicted final standings for every team in the league. And sitting right at the very top of the entire league was the Denver Broncos. The prediction had this team finishing with a 12-5 record and claiming the top seed in the conference. That is an enormous vote of confidence from a national outlet that has no rooting interest either way. It is worth noting that 12-5 would actually represent a slight step back from where the team finished a season ago, so this is not some wildly inflated homer prediction. It is a measured, respectable projection that still places this roster above every single other team in the league heading into the year. That is the kind of external validation that should have every fan of this franchise fired up for what is coming. So here is where things stand. There is a genuine mystery swirling around one of this roster's most important offensive weapons, one that likely traces back to a contract situation being quietly worked out behind closed doors while the player himself dances around questions with words like indubitably and phrases like being a good soldier. At the same time, almost everything else happening in camp is trending in a positive direction, from injury recovery staying right on schedule, to the quarterback thriving even without his top targets, to a national outlet projecting this team to finish at the very top of the league standings. There is a lot to sit with here, and honestly, a lot to be excited about even in the middle of the confusion. So drop a comment below with your own theory on what is really going on behind the scenes. Is this a contract dance, a hidden injury, or something else entirely? Let's hear it. And if you want to stay locked in on every single update, every press conference breakdown, and every storyline coming out of training camp this year, make sure you are subscribed to Broncos. Hit that like button before you go, and share this with another diehard fan who needs to be in the loop. There is a ton more to break down in the days ahead, and this channel is not going anywhere. Broncos country, buckle up, because this season is shaping up to be one for the books.